A very good morning, all the students. This is our second part of the chapter Working of Institutions. Students, in this chapter, now we are going to explain that how in India political party and the political and permanent executive works together. In a democratic country, there are two categories who make up the executive. One who is elected by the people for a specific period is termed as the political executive. In this category comes the political leaders who take the big decision. In the second category, people are appointed a long-term basis. This is termed as the permanent executive or civil services. So you can see that there are two parts of the political executive. One is known as the one category belongs to the people executive who takes the bigger decision, and the second category goes to the civil services servants. Persons working in civil services are termed as a civil servant. These officers remain in office even when the ruling party changes. They work under the political executive and assist them in carrying out day to day administration. Can you recall the role of political and non political executive in the case of office memorandum? Now, can you explain why does the political executive have more power than the non-political executive? Why is a minister more powerful than a civil servant? The civil servant is usually more educated, yes, and has more expert knowledge of the subject. The advisor who work in the finance minister have better knowledge about the economy than the finance minister. Sometimes the minister have very little knowledge about the technical matters that come under their ministry. This could easily happen in ministries such as the defense industry, health, science and technology, mining, etc. Can you say why should the minister have the final word on these matters? The reason is very simple. In any democracy, the will of the people is supreme. The minister is elected by the people and thus he/she is empowered to exercise the will of the people on their behalf. He/she is finally answerable to the people for all consequences of his or her decisions. These are the reasons why the minister takes all the final decisions. It is minister who decides the overall framework and objectives in which decision on policy should be made. The minister is not and is not expected to be an expert in the matters of his or her ministry. Indeed, the minister takes the advice of experts on all technical matter, but very often experts hold different opinions or place before him or her more than one option. Depending on what the overall objective is, ministry or minister finally decides. So you can see, students, that how the political executive divided in two parts. First are known as the political leaders, and second is you can say civil service servants. And how we can see that is the civil service executive are more having the more deep knowledge about the subjects like the finance and the economy or defense, but still the final decision is taken by the minister. So here you can say that ministers are more powerful than the civil servants. Actually, this took place in any large organization. Those who understand the overall picture take the most important decision, not the expert. The routes can be shown by the expert, but someone with a larger view decides the destination. In a democracy, this role is performed by elected ministers. Now, Prime Minister and Council of Ministers. The most important political institution in a democratic country is the Prime Minister. Yet, the post of the Prime Minister is not directly elected. The President appoints the Prime Minister, but the President cannot appoint anyone he/she likes. The President appoints the leader of the majority party or the coalition of the party that enjoys the support of the majority in the Lok Sabha as Prime Minister. In case a single party or alliance fails to get the majority, the president appoints the person most likely to secure a majority support. There is no fixed tenure for the prime minister. He continues in power so long as he remains the leader of the majority party or coalition. After the appointment of the Prime Minister, other ministers are appointed by the President on the advice of the Prime Minister. The ministers are usually from the party or the coalition which has majority in the Lok Sabha. The Prime Minister is free to select ministers as long as they are members of parliament. Sometimes a person who is not member of parliament can also be selected as a minister, but such a person has to get elected to one of the houses of the parliament within 6 months of appointment as minister. The official name for the body that includes all the ministers is called as Council of Ministers. What is Council of Ministers? The official name for the body that includes all the ministers are termed as Council of Ministers. It usually has 60 to 80 ministers of different ranks. Usually, the top level leaders of the ruling party or parties are cabinet minister. They are in charge of the major ministries. Usually, the cabinet ministers meet together and take decision in the name of the council of minister. Cabinet is thus the innermost ring of the council of minister. It comprises about 20 ministers. Ministers of state with independent charge are usually in charge of smaller ministries. They cannot participate in the cabinet meetings except when specially invited. Ministers of state are attached to and required to assist cabinet ministers. All the decisions are taken in the cabinet meetings because it is not practically possible for all ministers to meet regularly. That is why parliamentary democracy in most countries is often known as the cabinet form of government. The cabinet works as a team. The ministers may differ in their views and opinion, but everyone has to own up to every decision to the cabinet. Any decision of the government cannot be criticized openly by any minister, even if it is concerned with another ministry of department. Every ministry has secretaries who are civil servants. The secretaries give the essential background of information to the minister to take decision. The cabinet secretariat assists the cabinet which works as a team. This includes several senior civil servants who try to coordinate the working of different ministers. Powers of the Prime Minister. Now we will discuss what are the powers of the Prime Minister in a democratic nation. The Constitution does not state very much regarding the powers of the Prime Minister or the ministers or their relationship with each other. But as head of the government, the Prime Minister has a very wide range of power. Cabinet meetings are chaired by him. He coordinates the work of different departments. In case of any disagreement that arise between departments, his decisions are final. He exercises general supervision of different ministries. All ministers work under his leadership. The Prime Minister distributes and redistributes work to the minister. The Prime Minister also has the power to dismiss ministers. When the Prime Minister resigns, the entire ministry resigns. Thus, the cabinet is the most powerful institution in India, and within the cabinet, it is the Prime Minister who is the most powerful. In recent decades, the powers of the Prime Minister in all parliamentary democracies of the world have increased very much. That is why parliamentary democracy are sometimes seen as a prime ministerial form of government. As political parties play a major role in politics, the Prime Minister controls the cabinet and parliament through the party. The media also plays very significant role in supporting this trend by making politics and election as a competition between two leaders or party. In India too, such a tendency towards the concentration of power in the hands of the Prime Minister have been seen by us. Jawaharlal Nehru, the first Prime Minister of India, exercised enormous authority because he had great influence over the public. Indira Gandhi too was a very powerful leader in the comparison to her colleagues in the cabinet. Instead, the extent of power widened by a prime minister also depends greatly on the personality of the person holding that position. However, in recent years in our country, the rise of coalition politics has imposed certain constraints on the power of the prime minister. The prime minister of a coalition government usually does not take decision as he likes. He has to accommodate various groups and factions in his party as well as among alliance partners. He is also bound to need to the views and position of the coalition partner and other party on whose support the survival of the government depends. Now we will talk about the function and the power of the president. We have studied that the Prime Minister is the head of the government. The President is the head of the state. In the political system of India, the head of the state exercises only nominal powers. The President of India is like the Queen of Britain, whose functions are to large extent ceremonial. It is the President who supervises the overall functioning of all the political institutions in the country so that they work in harmony and achieving the objectives of the states. The president is not elected directly by the people. She is elected indirectly by the elected members of parliament, MPs, and the elected members of the legislative assemblies, MLAs. Assemblies, a candidate who contests for the post of the president is required to get a majority of votes to win the election. This is done to ensure that the president can be seen to represent the entire nation. At the same time, the kind of direct popular mandate that the prime minister he cannot be claimed by the president. This ensures that she remains only a nominal executive. The same is true of the powers of the president. If you casually go through the constitution, you would think that there is nothing that she cannot do. All governmental activities are taken place in the name of the president. All laws and major policy decisions of the government are issued in his or her name. All major appointments are made in the name of the president. These includes the appointment of the Chief Justice of India, the judges of Supreme Court and High Courts of the state, the governors of the state, the election commission, ambassador to the countries, etc. It is the president in whose name all the international treaties and agreements are made. The president is also supreme commander of the defense forces of India. But we must keep in our mind that all these powers are exercised by the president only on the advice of the Council of Ministers. The president can ask the Council of Ministers to reconsider its advice. But if the same advice is given to him or her again, she is bound to act according to it. Similarly, a bill passed by the parliament becomes a law only after the president gives assent to it. If the president wants, she can delay this for some time and send the bill back to the parliament for reconsideration. But if the parliament passes the bill again, she is bound to sign it. So, you may wonder, what does the president really do? Can she do anything on his or her own at all? There is one very important thing she do on his or her own. Appoint the prime minister. When a party or coalition of parties gets a clear majority in the election, the leader of the majority party or the coalition that enjoys majority support in the Lok Sabha is appointed by the president. When a party or coalition fails to get majority in the Lok Sabha, the president exercises his or her discretion. The president appoints a leader who, in his or her opinion, can muster majority support in Lok Sabha. In such a situation, the president can ask the newly appointed prime minister to prove majority support in the Lok Sabha within a specified time. So this is all about the power of president. Now, the third pillar of democracy, that judiciary. It is time to once again come back to the story of office memorandum that we began with. This time to imagine how different the story could have been. You must keep in mind that the story came to a satisfactory end because the Supreme Court pronounced a verdict that was accepted by everyone. Can you imagine what would have happened in the following situations if the institutions like the Supreme Court did not exist in the country? Even if there was a Supreme Court, it was deprived of power to judge actions of the government. Even if it had the power, if no one trusted the Supreme Court to give a fair verdict, even if it gave a fair judgment, if those who appealed against the government order did not accept the judgment. These are the reasons why an independent and powerful judiciary is considered necessary for all democracies. All the courts at different levels in a country put together are called the judiciary. The Indian judiciary comprised of a Supreme Court for the entire nation, high courts in the state, district courts, and the courts at local level. Indian judiciary is an integrated one. It means the judicial administration in the country is controlled by the Supreme Court. Its decisions are binding on all other courts of the country. It can take up any dispute that arise between citizen of the country, between citizen and government, between two or more state government, and between governments at the union and the state level. In all cases, civil as well as criminal, it is the highest court of appeal. It can hear appeals against the decision of the high courts. Independence of judiciary means that it is not under the control of the legislature or executive. The judges do not act on the direction of the government or according to the wishes of the party in power. These are the reasons why all modern democracy have courts that are independent of the legislature and the executive. India too has achieved this. The president appoints the judges of the Supreme Court and the High Courts on the advice of the Prime Minister and in consultation with the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court. In practice, it now means that the new judges of the Supreme Court and the High Courts are selected by the senior judges of the Supreme Court. There is almost scope for interference by the political executive. The senior most judge of the Supreme Court is usually appointed the Chief Justice. Once a person gets the appointment as judge of the Supreme Court or High Court, it is almost impossible to remove him or her from that position. It is as difficult as removing the President of India. A justice can be removed only through the process of impeachment motion passed separately by two-thirds member of the House of the Parliament. It has never taken place in the history of Indian democracy. The Indian judiciary is also one of the most powerful in the world. The Constitution of India empowers the Supreme Court to interpret constitution of the country. They are empowered to declare invalid any law of the legislature or actions of the executive, whether at the union level or the state level, if they observe that such a law action is against the constitution. Thus, the constitutional validity of any legislation or action of the executive in the country can be determined by the Supreme Court and the High Court of the states when it is challenged before him. This is termed as a judicial review. The Supreme Court of India has also ruled that the Parliament has no power to change the core of the basic principles of the constitutions. The powers and the independence of the Indian judiciary have empowered it to act as the guardian of all fundamental rights. We shall study in the next chapter that citizens have been given the constitutional right to approach the courts to seek remedy in any case of violation of their rights. In recent years, the courts have pronounced a number of judgments and directives to protect public interest and human rights. Anyone who feels that the public interest is hurt by the action of the government is entitled to approach the courts. This is termed as public interest litigation. The courts intervene to prevent the misuse of the government's power to make decisions. They check malpractices on the part of the public officials. These are the reasons why a high level of confidence is enjoyed by the judiciary among the people. So, students, you can see that in this chapter we have discussed about how the various institutions worked in a democratic nation togetherly in a harmonious way. You come to know that how the first of all the government order passed, then what is the role of decision makers, who are the people who involved in the decision making process of democratic nation. These are prime minister, minister, and the chief minister, then executive. Then we discussed about this chapter that what is the need for the political institution the country like India means democratic nation. Then we have studied about what is the role of and the functioning of parliament in India, and why do we need a parliament, what is the purpose and what is the various important function which is performed by the parliament. We have understood it. When we replace the parliament in our country, then we come to know that particular roles which was performed by the parliament, who will perform it. Then we have talked about the houses of parliament, Lok Sabha and Rajya Sabha, how they functions smoothly. Then We discussed about the political executive, then political parliament and executive, how they were divided. Then we have discussed about the powers and the limitation of the prime minister and the council of ministers. Then we have talked about the powers of prime minister and the role of president and the powers of president. Then we have talked about the judiciary. The judiciary, one of the most important pillar of the democracy, how independent the judiciary section in India, and then how powerful the Supreme Court decision, and it is welcomed by the every single citizen of India, that either the prime minister, president, or the common people. So students, this is all about the chapter, and now your syllabus for SST for class 9th is completed. Now the remaining question I will give you as a homework. Till then, take care. Goodbye.